I'd like to welcome everybody back today. Alabama Care. We have Mr. Kevin LaPorte with us, and Mr. LaPorte is the director of the new community waiver program that is going to be here in Alabama starting at the beginning of next month. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over. And Mr. LaPorte, if you would introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Kevin LaPorte. I'm, as you mentioned, the director of the Community Waiver Program. I've been involved with this program for about the past 19 months or so. I've been with the Department of Mental Health since 1995, and I've worked in various capacities between Searcy Hospital and the Division of Developmental Disabilities throughout that time.
Are you originally from Alabama?
Yeah, I'm from the Mobile area.
Okay. And we always like to ask, who do you root for in college football?
I spent my freshman year at Bama, so I'm a Roll Tide guy for sure.
Oh, heck yeah. My youngest brother went to South Alabama, so I always say go Jags. And
That's
go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's where I finished up and got my master's at South.
I heard they just are redoing or redid their new football stadium.
They just opened that stadium, unfortunately, in the year of COVID. But hopefully by this time, when football kicks off next year, they'll be able to open it up fully and appreciate it. It's a gorgeous stadium. I've driven by it.
That's what I keep hearing, and I think UAB kind of got prodded a little bit with that because then they built a new stadium up here in Birmingham.
Well, good for them. I know they're doing great up there.
Yeah, they got to print. My other brother's running backs coach at UAB, so he keeps me up to date on that.
Go Blazers.
Yeah, go Blazers, exactly. Okay, so let's, this is a new waiver program that's going to be coming out in Alabama. And if you could just introduce it for us.
Yeah, the community waiver is it's actually a conglomerate of a few different types of waivers that were necessary. And without getting into too much of the techno speak that was required by CMS and Medicaid, it's a conglomerate of three different waiver types that allow us to really support people to get more full participation in their communities, to preserve their natural or existing living arrangements, and possibly most importantly, to people who've been waiting on services in the state for a long time, to get people off the waiting list that have been on the waiting list for the current intellectual disabilities and living at home waivers for, in some cases, a matter of years. So those are really the goals of the program. It's, like I said, it's a multi-layered program with three different waivers involved to get these programs rolled out and get the services to people that need them.
From a systemic thing, why go to a new waiver program instead of increasing each of those three waivers?
That's a difficult question to answer, but starting with a whole new philosophy that's more community focused, that's more focused on helping people develop independent living skills to provide for themselves, that's less focused on perhaps residential services, supervised residential services. We do offer that as part of the program, but it's de-emphasized in favor of helping people learn to support themselves more independently and to build supports in the community to allow them to live more independently. So those are the focuses of the services that we put into place for this program and the way that the waiver programs are structured in order to achieve those goals, which would be more difficult to do in a radical transformation of an existing waiver.
That makes sense when you put it that way. So when you say more independent living, I think of someone living in their own apartment or their own house, maybe with a roommate, maybe with nobody at all, as opposed to what most people would think, way back, it used to be the institutions. And now we have community providers where it's like a 3 or a 5 person house. And so you're saying we're kind of making that transition to individuals living more on their own in their own places.
Yeah, more on their own, or if their choice is to live with family, or to live, as you mentioned, roommates, that's definitely something that's heavily supported in this waiver with a few of the services. There are even the approximation of fostering situations that can occur if the person chooses that, if that's what they want to do and it works for their situation and their preferences. We do have the group home option available for people that need or want that option. But again, it's de-emphasized in favor of these other options that we want to be based on the preference and capabilities of the individual with supports as needed.
When you say kind of with family, I that also takes a lot of training for the family to be able to step into that role as a traditional provider would.
Yeah, and that's an option. If they go with self-directed services, they can provide the services themselves to some extent. If they use a provider, certainly there are components of several of the services. I would say most of the services in which the provider staff, the caregivers that come from the provider, are going to help train the family and the person to better support themselves, so that they have to depend less on the paid providers. Those are all built into the services.
Okay. And this is kind of a broader thing from the home and community-based services that we're going toward in the next few years. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's definitely an extension of that effort. And again, I think one of the reasons to go with a whole new program is to build within that HCBS philosophy, instead of trying to adapt an established and very large system of waiver services to that philosophy, which is happening. But starting with something fresh from the ground up, we're able to build it in, bake it in from the beginning.
Hmm. It reminds me when you say it like that of kind of a startup or a smaller company being able to adapt and implement new changes quicker than, say, like an Amazon or a big Ford company.
I think that's a good analogy. We are starting small. We got a very fortunate legislative appropriation back in 2019 for this program, and we're starting small in order to get it right. You know, we're starting with 500 slots for the entire program for the first year, and the rationale there is to ramp up in a way that's realistic, that's manageable, and so that we can get all of the various people involved, including the individuals who be receiving these services, the providers, the support coordinators, the regional community services staff, the internal staff to the Division of Developmental Disabilities, get everybody trained up in a regulated and manageable and effective way, so that everything works the way we intend it to, and so that we can grow in the ensuing years.
Yeah, you kind of work those kinks out at a smaller scale and then build upon the challenges that you've overcome as you go there. Now, you mentioned that you've been working on the community waiver program, and the state has since about 2019. I think it's important to highlight that even though things are put into practice or put into place, that it does take time to implement these things. And if you could talk a little bit about how that process has been for you.
Yeah, and the development of the program predates my involvement for sure. And I was aware of it as an employee of Department of Mental Health, but there had to be an initial concept developed, that was developed by our consultant, Lisa Mills. And then that concept had to be put out for public comment to get the input of the people that are going to be affected by the program, the people receiving services, their caregivers, the provider network, the 310 boards that provide support coordination currently on the existing waivers, and of course, any other interested members of the public. And that process took a few months. And it was toward the end of that process that I was brought in, at the point that we started to actually write the waiver language. And this is, and again, without getting too technical or boring, hundreds of pages of documentation per waiver application, literally hundreds of pages. And so I was brought in on the front end to help with the technical writing and organizational parts of the process. And that part, we turned out a ton of words over the next few months, in terms of defining the services, defining how case management and support coordination work, defining how self-directed services work, and on down the line, person-centered planning. We have to lay all that out in great detail, and not to mention the funding aspects of the program. That's all wrapped into those applications. And that took months. And part of the way into that process, we started having direct meetings with CMS, and of course with Alabama Medicaid Agency. And we are still having those meetings. We started those, I believe, in October of 2019, and here we are almost at April of 2021. And we're still having those meetings on a weekly basis, because it's such an intricate and involved and detailed process, that to get it right, to make sure that all the components fit, that everything clicks, that everything's going to be compatible with the way that it's supposed to be, we have to have all those eyes and hands involved to get it right. And that has taken a long time. And unfortunately, in the middle of this process, the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, which slowed things down. It did not bring things to a halt, but it certainly slowed things down just because people were having to work remotely. Some people, of course, were affected directly by the virus that were involved in the development. So it has definitely taken time. And then more recently, our initial plan was to launch on January 1st, but with the change in anticipated change at that time in presidential administrations, the priorities changed and the leadership changes at the federal level. And so CMS was delayed in being able to approve our waiver program. Not that there was an issue with our program, but just their systems changed. And so it's been pushed back just by standard federal changes in administration. So it has been a very time involved process, but we are almost there.
When you talk about the writing of the waiver, that does not sound like something I would like to be involved in. I hate writing when it comes to a couple grants and stuff on a very limited basis that I've been writing. And I struggle. Like a 1-page paper will take me 2 to 3 weeks because I'll do it 10 times. And then I'll finally have to start fresh like the night before and it'll come out.
Well, I've done so much technical writing in my career. I was a psychological associate for about half my career at Searcy Hospital. And so I wrote psychological reports and things like that on a daily basis for 12 plus years. And then I chaired the policy committee there. So all I did was write technical writing projects on every day for most of my career there. And so it just translated over. So for me, I've got some processes in place and some experience doing that. So it translated well.
Yeah. You have quite an experience there. One thing that you mentioned about the public comment and putting it out is getting feedback from individuals that are going to be served. I think that's really cool that you guys did that. And I've received emails on that as a provider here in Alabama. But we have a lot of conversations about people with a disability being at the table when those decisions are made and being able to give feedback. So I think leading that effort in a new waiver and showing how that's done is a really cool thing. Was there anything, and I'll kind of put you on the spot here, was there anything that really jumped out from some of that feedback that you guys were like, oh, this is a great idea, we should start implementing this in it?
The one thing that I can recall off the top of my head was getting more organized efforts to get people into the community and to get them effective transportation to the places where those events are happening. And I'm not talking about like the facility-based day programs that are in place on the other waivers now, but more active involvement in their communities and whatever that might be. If it's getting help with shopping, if it's getting help with getting to entertainment, if it's getting help to get into social gatherings with their peers or anybody else in the community, was getting that transportation element into place. And we have a discrete service in this waiver that's not available in the other waivers that just focuses on transportation. And so it's always been a practical problem we've been aware of, but I think we've solved it in this waiver. And part of that, the impetus to get that done was from that public comment. And that's just one example, but it's the most prominent one I can remember.
Yeah, I know that transportation is a big topic here in Alabama. And from my understanding, a lot of that has to do with there just being so many smaller districts. Like if you were going to do a big public transportation, there's so many smaller districts that have to sign on and decide on that for a state. Like if we were to put a light rail all the way through the state, so you could go from Mobile to Montgomery to Birmingham, that there are a lot of different people there. What you mentioned that the transportation thing is unique to this waiver. Is that something that you can speak about?
Yeah, the focus there was to diversify the options and the possibilities for reimbursement to allow for um, as many different ways to get transported in a safe and secure way as possible. So there are ways for a family friend to be reimbursed for mileage. There are ways for someone to be reimbursed for using Lyft or Uber, for example. But there are also ways in that same service for organized providers that are in place now to offer transportation that's not just to the day program, not just to service related situations, but into the community as well, on-demand transportation and different ways to provide it, different ways to reimburse for it, so that we aren't sort of pigeonholed into only one way to do it that's only available at this time or for this purpose. We wanted to get some diversity in the ways that people can be transported and have access to it.
Yeah, I feel like that gives the individual a big say in how they, because some people don't want to ride the bus; they want a friend to take them. But sometimes I feel like you're paying out of pocket for the gas, and sometimes it can be like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to ask that person." But this gives a little bit of leverage there. Say, hey, the state will reimburse you for the mileage, for helping me out, and it gives them
Yeah.
a great opportunity to define how they want that. Some people might want to ride the bus or might want to ride a bigger transportation system.
Yeah, it opens up things to not only preferences, but to situations where they may or may not have access to one or more of those possibilities. But at least if one of them exists for those people, regardless of where they live or what their situation is or what their support system looks like, then they've got some way to get to where they need to go.
It sounds like you were thinking about the rural parts of the state that
You
some of
have
the,
to.
yeah,
Yeah, Alabama's got is primarily rural when you look at the distribution of people throughout the state and just the geographical distribution. And so we have to take that into account. We've run into that. I was the community services director for Region 3, and when you go into Clark County, Monroe County, Connecticut County, the transportation just is really difficult, particularly for people that live outside of the cities that are central to the county seats and so forth in those counties. So that's definitely something we try to account for.
Now, you mentioned that there's going to be 500 waiver slots open for the first year. Are those slots currently filled? I know you guys are official the first of next month, but do you guys already have those slots filled?
No. However, we've got them about 60% filled. Back in December, we started to reach out as one of our priorities for the program to people that were on the waiting list. And we went back and went in order of the length of time that people have been on the waiting list and started contacting them in each region. We had regional community services office staff spearheading this effort. And it's been very successful. To date, we've got nearly 300 people that say they want the services. And for people we've been able to reach, of course, some of their contact information is outdated, and we've got other efforts in place to address that issue. But for the people that we were able to reach, over 70% have agreed to accept the community waiver services, and that's a number that we're very pleased with.
Yeah.
That's a very high success rate, and happy to know that so many of those people are going to get the services that they've needed all this time.
Now, if somebody is watching this and they are on the waiting list and they haven't been contacted, could they reach out to you and your staff to see if they'd be eligible?
Yeah, what I would advise them to do at this point is to call the community services office in their region and ask to speak with the waiting list coordinator. Those are the staff members in the community services office that have been spearheading this and documenting their efforts and contact information. So if they haven't been in touch with you, it's probably a bad phone number, old phone number issue. So just call them, or you could reach out to your local, if you have a case manager, support coordinator, you could reach out to them and they can connect you.
I always recommend the case manager. And I think you should have a great relationship with your case manager. And if you're not happy, ask for a different case manager, but always be able to text them or call them whenever you need, because they're kind of they've been my point of entry for a family member of mine.
Absolutely.
Now, what age groups, normally when I think of my personal experience, I have a family member that is 56 years old. And so I think of the ID waiver and kind of long-term care, long-term living. But what age group does this new waiver serve?
From age 3 and up. So we've divided that into a few different enrollment groups, but we wanted to be able to serve anybody age 3 and up with an intellectual disability.
That is a big task to take on hand.
It really is, but it was one of it's something that we felt was not addressed adequately with the other existing waiver programs, and we didn't want to start this one out without covering that from the start.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to ask, we're going to separate those age groups into smaller groups and enrollment groups there, but how about the locations currently served in Alabama?
For the community waiver, we're in a pilot phase the first 2 years, and so as I mentioned earlier, we're starting a little small in order to get it right and to get things up and running. So, but there are pilot areas in every region, the regions that we define for the Division of Developmental Disability. So in Region 1, we're in Morgan, Madison, and Limestone counties. In Region 2, we're in Tuscaloosa and Walker counties. In Region 3, we're in Mobile and Baldwin counties. In Region 4, we're in Montgomery, Elmore, and Houston counties. And in Region 5, with the huge concentration of population in Jefferson County, we're in Jefferson County alone.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like Jefferson County is a pretty big area for the state of Alabama there.
Yeah, we base that distribution on the number of people on the waiting list in those areas, so that we could get at the highest concentration of people that still needed services that weren't receiving them yet.
Mhm.
And so Jefferson County definitely had the largest concentration of any area in the state.
Now, there were a few documents that were shared through our email. Would it be okay if I put those in chat after our broadcast? They kind of detail the community waiver program.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, perfect. One of the languages that was on that was this waiver is really to be there before a crisis were to hit the individual or the family. And I kind of wanted to talk about what that is or what is meant behind that crisis.
Yeah, historically, we see quite a few in each region and every month situations where somebody gets into a situation where they're in immediate need of support and assistance in some way. It could be because their caregiver became ill or passed away. It could be because they've lost their home for one reason or another. There could be lots of conditions under which that could happen. It could be because of a change in their medical status. It could be, I mean, there's just so many things that could happen there. So one of the goals for this waiver, again, was to build that independence, to build supports around the person so that if something like this comes up, we don't have to make radical changes in their life. We either got services in place to support them already, or we can make small changes that don't require a complete overhaul of somebody's lifestyle, of somebody's living situation, in order for them to continue living the way they prefer in the least restrictive situation possible.
Mm. And I feel like that happens quite often. Sometimes I'll push off stuff and it's like, I'll get to it, I get to it, I get to it. And then all of a sudden it's a crisis and I have to devote all of my time and all of my energy. And I have to, kind of divert other things away that I'm doing in my life just to solve that problem that's come up. But I know if I, even a few weeks to work through that process, that it would have been a lot smoother transition for me. So that's kind of the philosophy behind this.
Yeah, to have things already there so we don't have to uproot somebody from their preferred living situation that they're perfectly happy and successful at, because that happens in other situations. I've seen it many times in my role with the regional office, and it's unfortunate that that's the system we've had in place, and we're able to provide support for people, but sometimes their entire living arrangement will change and their entire daily routine will change in order to get those supports. Through the community waiver program, one of our big goals is to prevent that from having to happen. You still get the supports, you still have everything you need, but still in your environment of your choice, doing things in as much of a community integrated and supported way as possible.
Yeah, it's almost like taking, if you're, I don't want to say not responsible, but if you're relying on one thing too much and that one thing happens to go astray, then from a business perspective, you would like to have a lot of clients instead of one big client, because if that one big client cancels their contract, you're in deep water there.
Yeah,
But
those are good analogies. I think that's a very good way to describe what we're trying to accomplish. Yeah.
when I think about that, I would think about trying to get the individual and the family on the community waiver program and available to these services at a younger age to help them build up to that. Um, would you say there's a greater percentage in some age groups of those enrollment groups that are currently on the community waiver?
Well, for the people that have committed to receive services so far, it's primarily in the age group of 22 to, I would say, 49 or so. But actually, 22 to 39, I think, is the bulk of the people we have who've accepted so far. And that's mostly a function of it's mostly a reflection of the waiting list population. So it's people that have been in that age group who've been waiting for several years in some cases, but are still relatively young. As far as children, off the top of my head, I can think of only two cases of people we found on the waiting list that were waiting that would fall in like under age 14, for example.
Hmm.
And and then there were a handful. I don't have the number immediately available to me, but probably less than 40 total that were younger than 21.
Okay.
So it's a relatively small proportion, but that's only reflective of people who are on the waiting list. Now, when open enrollment starts, fingers crossed here on April 1st, that may change.
Mhm.
People, anybody that is in the pilot counties, the ones I listed off earlier, can call the state call center and apply to be on the waiver, and we may see a change in that.
Now you mentioned that it's 500, and then was that for the first year or for the first 2 years?
The first year,
The first year. And then about how many new waiver slots do you guys think you'll be able to go up to in the following year?
our goal is to add about 50% more, so to go up around 250. And
Okay.
some of that's a projection where every year the ID and LEH waivers lose slots because people have left. Unfortunately, people pass away, and there's some fiscal factors there where we may add some slots, so forth. And we're taking most of those slots and adding them to the community waiver, so it grows as there's attrition, natural, organic attrition off the other waivers. And of course, there'll still be slots there for emergencies for people that are not in the pilot areas, so that they can get services on the ID or LEH. And we've built in some ways for people to have access to those services that aren't on the community waiver through the ID and LEH. So we're not leaving anybody out in the cold, but we're growing this effort as the future of the division.
As in the future, as we go on, do you see the community waiver program kind of replace almost 80% of the ID LAH in a way?
It would be sometime far down the road, I think, and it's hard to project at this time, because again, you're talking about we're somewhere in the neighborhood of what 10% of the capacity of those
Yeah.
other waivers at this point. So it would take a long time. It's hard to say how long, and we haven't done an official projection there, but we definitely want to grow it. We
Mhm.
definitely want to see it flourish and to bring these options to other people. And of course, after 2 years, after this pilot portion of the program is over, um, anyone in the pilot areas who's been on the ID or LAH waivers can request to transfer over to the CWP.
Mhm.
For the first 2 years, we're just adding through the waiting list and through natural open enrollment in the pilot areas. But after that time, anybody who's receiving services in those counties can request to move over. So there'll also be some growth that way, and their slots will follow them. So that again, that'll be organic loss or I guess transition of slots from one program to the other.
Now, with a 50% growth rate year over year, about how long do you think until we can, if ever, say that we don't have a waiting list in Alabama?
Um, it's hard to say, but I know we are projecting to drop it by a third just off the um, initiative that we have now, and then it would be, I guess, in the neighborhood of about 1,000 people, just projecting off the top of my head based on the numbers I've seen recently.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be about 25% of what it was just about 2 or 3 years ago. So there's already been great success, great progress at attacking that waiting list and getting people the services that they need.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's definitely much smaller. So it shouldn't be that long, but that's something. There are a lot of factors there. It's hard to calculate.
Yeah, but it sounds like we've had the waiting list for quite a while, and it sounds like we're attacking it pretty aggressively right now as a state.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's just we've seen a lot of success at getting that thing reduced and getting those people the services that they need. If we're down into triple figures, by next year, I think that's a huge win, and we're
Yeah.
close to that. We're going to be close to that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, in the language on the shared documents that we have, it says that this waiver is for people that have an intellectual disability. Now, is it only for people that have an intellectual disability, or is it for other, such as physical disability?
It's exclusively for people with an intellectual disability, with one exception. We have one waiver authority. It's referred to as the 1915I, which is different than the 1915C authorities that are like the ID and LAH waiver. We have one of those in the CWP too, but the 1915I is a much smaller part of the program. We have 26 slots statewide for people who do not meet the exact criteria for intellectual disability. So it's a relaxed criteria in relation to adaptive functioning. So instead of the 3 areas of disability and the level of care that someone would have to qualify for intellectual disability for the other waivers, on this, if they have one area on their ICAP, which is an adaptive functioning assessment that we use, if there's one area on there that has a score less than 480, then they can still qualify for services under the 1915I. And so they may not have the social functioning challenges or self-care challenges, for example, that someone who qualifies as ID may have, but they still have some challenges, and we want to support those people so that they don't ever get in a situation where they need those 1915C services. And they might be close to meeting ID eligibility criteria, but they're not quite. And so we have a different set, it's just not a different set, a subset of services that we're using to support those folks to keep them, again, to be proactive, to keep them from getting to the point that they need a more restrictive situation or more intensive services.
Hmm. Now, a lot of the language that the new community and home and community-based services is talking about is individualized services. And I'm going to ask you about the 4 enrollment groups and maybe ask for some examples of an individual or a family in each of those groups and what a service could be like, look like for them. But in general, what does services designed for individuals or individualized services mean to you?
Primarily, and this is a philosophy we've had for many years, of course, in the division. It's choice-based services. So the person can, through the person-centered planning process, through working with their support coordinator and their providers, develop a set of services that works for them, their situation, their preferences, their goals, what they want to achieve on not only on a daily basis, but long-term for their lives. I mentioned the transportation service as an example, where somebody can basically design that to whatever fits their needs. And we've tried to develop that in the other services as well. So, for example, for employment, which is a real focus of this program, they can start at the point in that suits them and their experience and their needs. So, if they're not ready to have a job coach, or to actually seek out a place to work, but they need some help learning about soft skills for interviewing, for interacting with coworkers, things like that. There are services for that. Or if they just want to learn if they want to work at all, there's an exploration service, there's a discovery service that's part of that employment, so they can choose those things. So there's different tiers, not really tiers, but different options within the services that allow them to sort of customize those things for themselves.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a kind of a cafeteria style of services where you can go and kind of add to your plate. And when you say those different, I'll say kind of steps in employment, like it allows you to choose which step you want to try. And maybe you don't want to try that other step, or you feel like you're not quite ready yet. So focus on this step first, breaking that big process up into smaller steps and being able to put them on your tray for the time being.
Yeah, it's definitely broken down into smaller steps, as you mentioned. And of course, we'll have supports through the providers who will assess and help the person decide which step is best for them. But at the end of the day, that choice of the person is going to be key as well.
Now, we mentioned earlier in the broadcast that there's a lot of training, and I imagine you guys have been sending out a lot of information and meeting with regions and 310 boards and case managers. And how has that been for you guys over the past year?
It's been pretty intense. I think it's been pretty intense for the people receiving the training too, but it's been effective. We're well on schedule with all of it. We've been meeting with the providers who elected to participate in the CWP since the end of August. We've been having ongoing trainings with them 2 to 4 times a month, depending on availability and resources and speakers. And we've been training our support coordination staff since the beginning of January. And they've recently completed training, and they're doing some more outreach to people on the waiting list now. But it's been, of course, we've had to train our internal staff since this started. I remember when I was with the regional office, from the public comment sessions were happening, we also had coincidental trainings for the regional office staff to understand what this initiative was. And then we've had to update that as the program changed during our talks with CMS and Medicaid. So it's been an ongoing training process, an ongoing learning process, not just for the people we're training, but for the staff that are managing and developing this program as well. It's been a real crash course, but it's been good. We've all learned a lot, and I think we've also learned how we're going to see the benefits of this program for the people that are going to receive the services.
Hmm. One thing that I always struggle with is getting feedback. We are funded through the Alabama Council of Developmental Disabilities, and we have quarterly reports that we have to give back. And we go live on Facebook, so we have some of the data from viewership there. But whenever I ask for like someone to take a survey, or I'll put a survey up on the page, there's not much feedback on that. So it's kind of hard to get some of that feedback. And I always thought that was a really tricky thing to do, is measure success and how do you get that back? What are some ways that you guys are kind of thinking about measuring that success?
Well, there are established satisfaction surveys that are done each year, and they'll continue doing that. And those are face to face. It's a representative sample, so not everybody gets interviewed, for example, but
Mhm.
it's a representative sample of people. So it's an active process, not just relying on people to passively respond. So they're actually going out, but also um, this whole program, and I'll say this for the ID and LEH as well, it, it's built on that personal interface between the person, their support coordinator, their providers. That's why they have the team meetings that the person is the de facto chair of.
Mhm.
And there's feedback there as well on their satisfaction with their services, with how they feel about what's being done, if they need more, if they need less, if they need something different. So there's a ton of face-to-face interaction. Plus, there will be monitoring of those services that will involve talking with the person about how they feel about it. So there's multiple layers of face-to-face interaction and giving that feedback on how the program's going for somebody who's receiving the services in the program.
I love that it's face to face and getting that one-on-one feedback there. For my family member, our person-centered planning once a year can always be updated as long as we have the right people that want to make changes there,
Yeah,
but is instrumental in designing what she wants for the next year of her life. And always, we have goals, she has goals, and so we can assess those goals throughout the year and see how she's doing on them. So that's very cool. As you
it is.
get a lot of that feedback, I mean, it takes time to go through. Besides yourself, how many people do you have on your team specifically for the community waiver program?
Well, it's a growing group. Just for my office, there's me and the provider network manager who interfaces directly with our provider group, is working to develop that group, make sure they're trained, make sure they're supported and ready to roll when services are needed. And that's Harrison Black. Um, and we just hired a group of 3 certification staff that haven't even been announced yet, but we have filled all those positions, and they'll be going out and offering technical assistance to the providers, assessing how the program's going for them, which will directly impact the people receiving services, of course. And then trying to think of how many support coordinators that we have in place. I think ultimately they're going to be about 24, but we started with, I think, 12 or 13 as we ramped the program up. Support coordinators across the state that are working exclusively on the community waiver program. And those are under the supervision of Francilla Allen, who's the Director of Support Coordination for the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So, and our consultant, Lisa Mills, of course, instrumental to this process. She designed the program, has done at least as much writing as I have on the program, and our Associate Commissioner, Terry Prezent, very much involved on a daily basis as well.
That's awesome that you have a team there, because as something as this big and the growth that you guys want to see there, it can be tough to do without support there, and to have that team surrounding you. I'm glad that you have that there for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I could name off probably 20 other people who have had a direct hand in this. The executive staff for the division has been invaluable. I mean, we couldn't have done any of this without their input, their expertise, and their help.
Let's talk about the 4 enrollment groups. So you said that the community waiver program serves individuals that are 3 years and older,
Mhm.
but it's kind of broken into smaller groups depending on age there. And if you could go over those for us.
Yeah, 3 of the 4 groups. There's actually 5 groups. I mentioned the 1959. That would be our 5th group. Um, and that's for 23 years old and older. The 1959, just as an aside. But as far as the waiver enrollment groups for the 1915C, there are four. Three of them are based on age. So we've got one group specifically for children who live with their family or with other natural supports from ages 3 to 13. Transition age youth from 14 to 21 years old who live with family or natural supports. Of course, at 18 or older, they might live independently. That could be a possibility. And then the third group is working age or older adults aged 22 or older who live with family and natural supports or independently as they prefer, as the situation requires.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth group is for people 3 years old and older who are unable to live with family or natural supports for whatever reason, and unable to live independently. So that would be the group where we do have some residential, supervised residential options.
Okay. And if you could give a kind of an example in each one of those enrollment groups and of an individual or a family that would be eligible for the community waiver program, and then maybe some hard examples of what a service or services could look like for them. For them.
For the age 3 to 13 group, the children group, we call that essential family preservation supports. And that could be someone who has ID, is receiving services through the school, but the family needs help before and or after school in one way or another. So they could need personal assistance with anything from grooming to feeding to medication, just depending on the person's circumstances. They could need behavioral supports to help with behaviors at home, to help shape those behaviors into a more positive direction. And it can involve anything from home modifications if they had a coexisting physical disability that required a ramp, for example, or bars in the bathroom, anything like that. Could it include assistive technology if there are iPad apps that could help with any sort of developmental issue or learning issue? Those sorts of things could be covered. So it's a broader array of services, even respite for the family to get some supervision and some help while the family takes a break. Mm-hmm. So lots of options there, but that's the most common example I could think of in terms of just someone who needs the help before and after school at that age.
Yeah, I was going to kind of hone in on that. So you're saying that somebody could come into the home before and after school, so maybe after 3 o'clock or before 7 o'clock or 7:30, and help with personal care, behavioral supports, stuff like that.
Yeah,
that would be a big thing, I imagine, for parents and for a family to. It can be a tough thing if you don't know you don't know new ways to help with behavioral supports, and you have an expert coming in, not only teaching your child, but also teaching you how to keep up that support after they leave the house.
And that teaching of the caregivers is an essential element that's baked into those service definitions, so that, right, we're not just building up the person needing services, but building up the support system around them so that they don't need somebody from outside as much. And progressively over time, hopefully everybody there becomes more independent, resulting ultimately in the most independence for the person served.
I imagine that the behavioral support could really be a positive factor in this age group. If you address those behavioral supports at a young age and allow them to grow on that, make a huge difference, 50 years down the line.
There's no doubt about it. And they can train not only the family for the person served, but also they can offer input to the school system on making sure those supports are consistently implemented across the board, so that we ensure that there is a higher opportunity, higher chance of success down the road.
That gives sustained
success. Yeah.
Yeah, that gives the individual consistency throughout all of their environments if they have those things that they're used to and can rely on.
Yeah.
What would an example look like for an individual and a family in the 14 to 21 age group?
I think for any school-age person, it would be fairly similar to what I just described. But once you get into the more the 18 and up range, you see some opportunities for employment, for example, where they might get into a discovery or exploration aspect of the supported employment individual service. And if nothing else, just get exposure to a work environment. They might just go and observe and be introduced and talked to by people that work in that environment about what the job is like, what it takes, what pay is like, the same things any of us would ask about a new workplace. But getting them used to that idea, exploring if they're interested in that idea, if that's something they want, and then structuring how do we get to the point where they can do that work if that's what they want to do. So we can see that development. Also, there's opportunities there. We have a couple of specialized services in this waiver, one called housing counseling and one called housing startup assistance, that are designed to help people get their own place. So the housing startup assistance is actually financial assistance to pay deposits, to pay for move-in, just to get somebody set up on the front end for their own place. Housing counseling would occur before that, helping somebody identify what kind of place they want, what it would take to get that place, financially, what's it going to take to get set up, and how are we going to get you supported in that home to meet your needs, to make sure you don't have to rely on previous supports, to get you as independent as possible. So that's where we start to see that transition to adulthood that all of us make. And we just want to, through this particular enrollment group, make sure that the people have the options that they need to make that transition successfully, like anybody else.
Yeah, when you say independent living, that would be a big thing that I think pops up is, well, what does that look like in an apartment? And this is something new. So we have to go through and train on this and educate on this. And I feel like that's going to be a big factor in the years to come, is helping people with their housing.
Yeah, we do too. And that's why Lisa baked in these various, not just a group home residential situation, but there's a service called supported living services that could be a person living alone or a person living with roommates who could be on the waiver or not, or they could be on a different waiver, but they would have somebody that they could contact at any time if they needed assistance, but they don't have constant supervision. Instead, they have an individualized custom plan for when they might need help or when they might need to seek help, that they know how to access, or that is set up to offer that assistance on a routine basis, but not 24/7. Just depends on the person's needs. So again, there's that customization that we wanted to build in.
When you talk about like a group of people kind of helping there, the supported decision making comes to mind. I hear that word a lot. And that may not be for direct people from providers or stuff like that, but also, I don't want to say outsourcing, but getting the help from other people in the community that may be friends and know where to go from there. Do you guys focus on relationship building in the community outside of what we would consider like, traditional help from the state and community providers?
Yeah, definitely. We initially had a supported decision-making type of service in the waiver that we just couldn't negotiate to a point of clearly defining it with CMS, but there's still aspects of that there. If you look at our, there's independent living skills training services, there's a community, blanking the so many services, I forgot the name of the one.
Yeah, I know. It's like you said, a cafeteria list of them there.
Yeah, community integration, connections, and skills training, which is more for the next group up, but that's a situation where you're doing exactly what it says, connecting people to resources in the community, training them how to find those, how to access those connections, and helping them help themselves by knowing where to go and getting taught how to do those things. We also have peer support specialist peer specialist services. And I think several of the services are like that. Housing counseling is to not just be told what's going to be best, but to help you decide for yourself with the information you need to make the best decision possible about housing.
Oh, we're talking about how these services are going to be delivered to the individual, and you were talking about employment. We've done a few broadcasts with ADRS on employment. So structurally, will the individual still go through the same process? Like, will ADRS still be the one that would be giving employment services, or other community providers that contract with ADMH? So the structure's there, but now they have the option to deliver more services.
Yeah, that will give them the option to deliver more services, but ADRS is by definition of CMS and Medicaid has to be the first option.
Hmm.
that's used, and for some reason they're not able to provide the services, then we can do that through the waiver,
Yeah.
through the CWP.
Okay. Gotcha. And is there an example of anything a little bit past the employment and housing that you'd really like to touch on, maybe for a longer care?
Yeah, once they make that transition to adulthood, we're looking at the third enrollment group, which is family, career, and community life supports. And I think that's the title there is the best way to describe it. It's making sure on a day-to-day, year-to-year basis that the person's adult goals, that their needs as a grown person are met. So if they've decided to go to work, that we're providing support for that as long as they need it. Ideally, we want to help somebody through coaching, through the job development to get to the point that they're not relying on anyone else. But some people are going to need support. That's just a fact. Not everyone, but some people need some level of support, even if it's intermittent, even if it's an hour or two a week. Some people are going to need that. So we want to customize that to be what they need, what they decide, what's working for them and their employer if they choose to be employed over that period of time. So these supports, these services are designed to help them maintain what they've developed earlier, but also to help them grow as time goes on and to develop, to change their minds if they want a different job, as we all do at different times.
Yeah.
We all change over with the years, and we want our people in the waiver that are being supported to have that option as well.
Yeah. If I were to look back 10 years ago, I'd be like, dude, what were you thinking? Don't do that. You want different goals, believe
We've
me.
all been there.
So it's very exciting that this new waiver is coming out starting next month, April 1st. And I know that it's taken quite some time to get to this point, but are there any success stories or anything that you'd really like to highlight for anyone watching to get them energized about this new waiver program?
Well, I think from the beginning of the process that it's been a success story to get the legislative appropriation in the first place that has allowed this to happen was a big success story. To get an 1115 demonstration waiver approved to manage this whole situation. Again, that's sort of techno speak, but that's a level of approval that was suspended for a period of time through CMS, but we were able to get one approved in order to make this happen. They're very excited about what we're doing here at the federal level. So they've been very supportive. That's a huge win, huge success story. And the fact that we're, within a couple of weeks here of it actually getting approved and actually launching is a super big success story. Getting experienced staff for our support coordinator certification positions has been a big success story. We have a robust response to the announcement. So we've got experienced people, good seasoned staff in those positions that are going to help make this thing work and help the people that need the services get what they need and what they want. The provider response was a big success story. These providers during the year of COVID have undergone significant staffing challenges, significant fiscal challenges, and they still stepped up to the plate to get in here and be a part of this new program, which means finding new staff, which is a huge difficulty right now, but they're doing it. Yeah. They're getting their staff trained. They've been an integral part of this process for the past year, and we're very excited about that. And the other big success story, and we mentioned it earlier, is the response from the people in the waiting list. Getting a 70% acceptance rate from people who've been waiting, and I'm sure frustrated, for years is a big success for us. We're excited to be able to get those people services they waited on for a long time and to get them supported and moving forward with their lives as they wish.
Yeah. I'd like to acknowledge someone in chat. Susan Ellis says the community waiver program will reduce/end the massive waiting list, finally offering supports to folks who have been on the list the longest. Thank you, Susan.
That's true. That's our big goal.
Ryan Alfred, good to see you here. Mr. James Tucker, RTR, good to see you here, sir. And Sherry Barber, thank you for watching with us today. Mr. LaPorte, as we come to an end here, I want to really thank you for your time with us and walking us through the community waiver program. As Mr. LaPorte has mentioned, there are roughly still 200 spots that are to be filled this first year. So if you know that you're on the waiting list and you haven't gotten a call, please reach out to your case manager and see if you are eligible first of all, have a great relationship with your case manager, and reach out and see if you're eligible for the community waiver program. And then I will post some documents here in the chat that go a little more detail over the community waiver program. And Ms. LaPorte, is there anything that you'd like to kind of close out with here for individuals, their family members and organizations watching, that they might be able to take something?
Oh, I would just like to encourage everyone, if you're offered the services, if you have the opportunity to accept these services, I would encourage you to do so. It's a great program. We're going to have a lot of options for you. You're going to be surprised at how you can customize these services for yourself and improve your life and get the supports that you need. We're devoted to making this happen for you, and we want you to be a part of it.
Very cool. Mr. LaPorte, thank you once again for being with us here.
Thank you.
And you have a great rest of your day, sir.
You do the same. Thank you.